Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 18th of March, 2022, and I've just fired up this Facebook Live, and hopefully it's working right. I'm here today to talk about something I've been working on for the last few days, and it's turned out to be a sort of a lot more work than I thought, but quite rewarding, and I thought I'd share it with you right now. I hope you enjoy it. Basically, it's talking about the year 1998 in Montreal. You probably recall this. You were 24 years younger, 23 years younger, about. Probably better looking and smarter than you are now, just as myself. And the year 1998 was, of course, just before the millennium. And it was a time when not that many people had internet. I mean, we had it, but it was dial up and there wasn't much happening. So it wasn't really the same era as we're living today. What you had is also the biker war, which was in in full force at the time. The Rock Machine versus the Hells Angels, which was a battle over cocaine control, drug dealing. So you had a lot of chaos. But of course, what Montreal really remembers from 1998 would be the ice storm of early in the year. And of course, that hit people in a very different way. Some people were devastated by the ice storm because, of course, the electricity went off, power was off all over the place. Some people didn't even notice it. They didn't even miss a beat. Myself, I was really inconvenienced by the ice storm. I was living on Addington near Upper Lachine in NDG, and our power was off for quite a long time. And it was hugely inconvenient. The ice storm is really etched into people's memories. If you look up 1998 Montreal, all you'll find is stories about the ice storm this, ice storm that. Hopefully everybody who's listening can hear me now. If you do, please write a little comment because I'm a little unsure. So the first murder of 1998 took place in Verdun on Wellington Street, a store called Rage Underground, a body-piercing shop, which presumably was also a tattoo shop. A guy named Eric Persicino. He was age 31 of Laval. I guess he probably owned the place. I've seen his name reported as Perfacino, but it seems to be Persicino. And I don't know much about Eric Persicino other than he died that day at the age of 31 in his body-piercing shop on Wellington, 4422 Wellington Street in Verdun. It was a Saturday afternoon, and there was another employee there. So somebody came in and just simply shot him. There was another, he was wearing a mask. There was another employee in at the time. And let me show you what 4422 Wellington looks like now. Anyway, so that crime remains unsolved. It's a nice little place now. Lovely little place on Wellington. But of course, the 90s was a different vibe. It was a lot more of a sort of a menacing period, right? And, people were doing a lot of drugs. That's what I'd have to tell you about that time. So we do not know who committed this murder, but we do know that it was ordered by Peter Parody of the Rock Machine. Now, Peter Parody himself became a sort of a kind of a sort of a celebrity. He wrote a book. I think he went into witness protection programs, so he's out there somewhere today, presumably. And he was not implicated, I don't believe, in this murder directly. So whoever did it got away with it. So Eric Persicino was the first murder of 1998 on the island of Montreal. And of course, we get to the next one, which is a guy named Jerry Laurent. This is a strange kind of incident where he was just fooling around with his friends at his place on 11722 Langelier Boulevard in Montreal North. And it was a Tuesday evening at about 10:30 p.m. And what happened is Jerry Laurent was in a street gang, and his friends were just sitting around his apartment that evening. And he started pointing a loaded sawed-off shotgun at his friends. I'm still editing what I've written. And they understandably objected, and one of them scuffled against Jerry Laurent for acting in this reckless behavior. And Ezekiel Monuma, age 20, he ended up shooting Jerry Laurent in the struggle. So he was given a 2-year suspended sentence for a manslaughter. And the thing about Monuma, we don't really know what sort of guy he was when this happened, but he became a prominent member of street gangs after that. He was in the Unit 44, affiliated with the Bogas, aka the Reds. So he became a hardened criminal after serving time or after this episode. So I don't really know if it's this incident which made him a hardened criminal or if that was his fate all along. But he ended up shooting a guy in front of the Bell Center, right in front of police at a rap show, and the guy only survived. It was a gang rival because he was wearing a bulletproof vest, and you had him also involved in a thing in 2010 where he was threatening some mafia guys who were selling cocaine in RDP. So I don't know where Monuma is nowadays. I don't have a photo of him, but he's probably sort of a dangerous character. Now, the third one, speaking of dangerous characters, this is a pretty interesting story. It's about a guy named Ian Ugorov, who was killed, 21 years old, shot dead in the chest. And they found him at the college metro station in Ville Saint Laurent. Somebody had dropped him off in a black Thunderbird. So eventually, a guy named Evgeny Matayev, who was 24, 3 years older than him, was charged with the crime. So what this is all about is this. Ugorov and his friend, the victim and his friend Alexander Fedosov, they were irritated with Matayev because Fedosov was charged with stabbing a guy in Angry Down Park, while Matayev is the actual culprit. He was the one who did the stabbing. So these two guys confronted Matayev to say, look, you've got to either confess to the stabbing or at least pay some of the lawyer's fees. They all met on Bourbonniere Avenue in Ville Saint Laurent, and I guess Matayev was sort of outnumbered, and he kind of panicked, and he shot Ugorov 3 times, and also hit Fedosov in the arm. He hit an artery, and a third guy, Oleg Kudryatsev, escaped unharmed, only because Matayev had run out of bullets. So what happened is after Matayev shot his 2 compatriots, they all tried to drive Ugorov to the hospital, but they couldn't really find one. They didn't know where to go, and so the guys got out to make a 911 phone call, but the driver drove off, unfortunately. So that's why police eventually found, or the emergency staff found, the Ugorov's dead body on the street outside the college metro. I don't have a photo of Ugorov, unfortunately. Now, the thing about Matayev is he did time for his crime. I don't know exactly how long, but he did attempted murder and secondary murder. But later on, he was actually involved in some pretty horrific stuff. He was charged with pimping and torturing a woman named Sandy, who arrived in Montreal from St. Louis in 2008. So there was some discussion about declaring Matayev a dangerous offender. So this guy Matayev, I believe he might still be behind bars, but he did worse stuff as time went by. So that's not a good thing. Now we're talking about the number 4 murder of 1998. There was a construction worker named Reynald Bossé, who was 56 years old. Now this seems to be a real evil character. He had cultivated a young underage male lover named Konstantinos Karamitos from the age of 14. And he was giving Karamitos drugs in return for sex. I mean, that's a pretty awful thing to be doing to a 14-year-old. So they were at an apartment at 8325 Acadian Park Extension. And so what happened is Karamitos, he stole a 12 caliber rifle, and he happened to be schizophrenic. Not only was he sexually abused by this Reynald Bossé character, but he had voices in his head telling him to kill Bossé as part of a purification ritual. So he shot Bossé dead, and he took off. He scrammed out of town, and it took police a few days to find young Konstantinos Karamitos. He was in St. Jerome in a detox center. So what happened is he was sentenced to 6 years for manslaughter. and the judge recommended he do his time at the Penal Institute for the Criminally Insane. So presumably Konstantinos Karamitos, he would be about what, 22 plus 20, 18 plus 24 would be what? He'd be in his 40s now. He's likely still around, I guess. So he obviously went through a bad time. Now, number 5, murder of 1998, was on 11th of March, when Michel Senecal, he was aged 46. He was, this is an outrageous thing to have happened to somebody who was just sitting at home at 3707 St. Catherine East, and he owed a guy some money, just a little bit, $130. So another fellow came to his door to collect the money. This guy named Richard Font Rouge, 35, younger guy. He was so insistent that he actually knocked down the door over this lousy $130, and he threatened the guy and basically shot him dead in the throat with a sawed-off shotgun. Senecal had just told him, look, I paid that money back to a third party. So Font Rouge was charged with murder. So this was just crazy. Imagine somebody coming to your door saying, you owe me $130, and then he shoots you dead. Like, what's the point of that? It's a shame to see this sort of thing happen. It's how many people lose, the guy who the victim loses his life, his family loses a family member. I mean, I'm just telling you platitude stuff you already know, but it's worth repeating that everybody loses in this sort of situation. Now, this number 6 is quite interesting. There's an image here on my computer screen. You might be able to see it. It's a shot of a guy wearing a toque taken from a surveillance camera in the hallway of the halfway house on Ogilvy Avenue. So this person was never apprehended. He was the killer of a security guard. So on 14 March 1998, Richard Chabot, aged 35, he was at work one evening, and it was a Saturday evening, and a guy walks in and shoots him dead. That's it. He was thought to be about age 30, as seen in the grainy surveillance footage. There's more to this story, though. I'm going to tell you that the police never solved this murder, but Michael Fidanoglu, he's a bad character. He's still in jail to this very day, Michael Fidanoglu. He later shot a bank customer in a bank robbery of a Caisse Populaire on Van Horn. And they found, as he was fleeing, he tossed away a .357 caliber Ruger revolver. And guess what? That's the same gun that was used to kill Richard Chabot. They couldn't tie Fidanoglu with the murder of Richard Chabot on Ogilvy Avenue. By the way, that's right next to 405 Ogilvy Avenue, where the CFCF Montreal TV station used to be. And I guess it was still there at the time in 1998. I know it was definitely there a couple of years before that. So this is sort of a very easy story for them to cover because it's literally right next door to their building. So police couldn't pin the murder of Richard Chabot, which remains unsolved, they couldn't pin it on Crazy Mike Fidanoglu, but he's behind bars now, and he still is. He's the suspect of many other murders, and I'm going to mention another one very soon. So the 7th murder of 1998 was on 26th of March, a guy named Daniel Letourneau. He was in a parking lot in St. Henry when somebody shot him dead. It was the thing was that Letourneau had recently switched from the Rock Machine to the Hells Angels. He was a member suddenly of the elite rocker faction. He lived in Port St. Charles, and nobody knows who did it. I mean, somebody came up and pulled the trigger. So presumably it was one of his former compatriots in the Rock Machine who killed him. Of course, the Hells Angels prevailed in that biker war, and the Rock Machine fared less well. There was, the war lasted about 4 more years, and many of the Rock Machine patched over to the Hells, and that's how they survived. So it was an ugly mess for those who remember it, and we're glad it's over. The 8th murder of 1998 was on April 3. There was a guy named, this is quite mysterious, a guy named Walter Danko, aged 55. Now, I didn't see a photo of him. I didn't see any real descriptions of what this guy was about, other than the fact that he lived in Ville d'Anjou, and he was a landlord making money from rental properties, and he was simply found wrapped up and dead in his trunk in an orange plastic tarp at the Dorval airport. He was there to leave town for a few days on a trip, and police hadn't the slightest clue what could have happened to him. They interviewed his friends and his tenants, and nobody was ever arrested for the murder of Walter Danko. Seems like a very strange story. And the ninth murder of 1998 was a kid named, two kids, just little kids. It was such a shame. 18 April, Martin Desrosiers, age 17. He got stabbed to death at the corner of Sherbrooke and Carignan. Carignan. A 16-year-old was charged with this murder. They were just drinking beer and they had an argument. So in other words, of course, the 16-year-old was caught, but we don't know his fate because he was an underager. Now, this is quite a strange one. Those living in NDG, I don't know if anybody would remember this. I was hoping to get a better photo of this victim, Richard Jeffers, because I think he had a lot of loved ones. There's still a few Jeffers family members around Montreal today. So on 17 April, Richard Jeffers, 21, he died. But it was the result of a stabbing that he had endured many months earlier. In fact, he was stabbed on 8 June 1997. So how many months earlier was that? He was driving west on Sherbrooke Street, right near Girouard, and somebody came out in another car and just stabbed him. So keep your doors and windows locked if you can, unless it's too hot. But this, of course, was a nice warm summer evening, 8 June 1997. So that remains unsolved. So Richard Jeffers is a victim of a murder that remains unsolved, and it's a shame, you know. I live not too far from there, and the corner of Girouard and Sherbrooke is a fairly perilous corner, and for people tend to die there from getting run over by cars sort of regularly. But this stabbing is totally inexplicable what that could be about. Now on 17 May 1998, another young man died, unfortunately. Stéphane Lia. He was at a community garden in St. Leonard. That's where he was from, a St. Leonard kid, Italian kid, near La Cordaire and Grande Prairie, or Des Grandes Prairies. It was behind a bar. So basically, Stéphane Lia was involved in street gangs, but he left town because he wanted to get away from the street gangs. So he went to Ontario and was hanging out with a friend for about a month, or for some time. But he came back, and when he returned, his friends asked to meet him at the Henri Bourassa metro station, and that's the last that was seen of him. So his brother Patrick was interviewed about this, the death of his brother Stéphane, and he believed it to be his involvement with street gangs. So it's just a sad story. This handsome young man lost his life for no real reason. The 12th murder of 1998 was on 26 May, and this was basically two people who had mental issues. Okay, John Lipinski Jr., 37 years old, was stabbed and killed 13 times at the Hickson House in Verdun, and a fellow patient, George Kusiulis, apparently also 37, was charged. So Kusiulis had been hearing voices, and he believed that Lipinski was going to kill him, so he killed Lipinski before. And Kusiulis immediately confessed to a priest. So Kusiulis, it was reported, had been suffering mental illness for a good 20 years, and he was full-blown paranoid schizophrenic. So he also tried to murder his janitor a few years before that. So that's just a sad story of two people with a lot of problems, one of them who died. The 13th murder of 1998 was murder-suicide, a very sad story because it was a young man, pardon me, a young man named Luc Tran, 26. He had a crush on a woman, Han Nguyen, 22, of course Vietnamese. They were found dead in a murder-suicide on the top floor of a duplex in Villeray on Berry Street. Now, the thing was, Tran was a university graduate, and he wasn't able to find work. I guess there was some unemployment problems back in the late 90s. I should mention that Montreal in the 90s was in a pretty bad economic state for a while, but eventually like all of North America had a bad recession in the early 90s, but Montreal managed to keep its recession going because of that, likely because of that thing in 1995 that we had. And anybody who lives through that period will know what I'm talking about. November 1995 was the second referendum on Quebec separatism. So that really screwed up our economy. But by 1996, this economy started rolling pretty good. And by 98, it should have been fairly robust. So what happened is Nguyen turned down Tran's advances, and she, friend zoned him. She told him, let's just be friends. So what happened is Tran, he tied her up, and then he tied himself up, and he just set the bedroom on fire. So I guess they died of fire, or maybe, I'm not sure if he killed her first, but Tran wrote a note in Vietnamese. Nobody knows what it says. Now this is a strange one. June 7, 1998, an old man named James Olerhead, 71. He was in his hospital room. He is an Alzheimer's patient. He was at the Lakeshore Hospital. He'd been there for a couple of years. He was from England. He had a wife, I guess common law wife, even though we don't do common law in Quebec, we'll call her that. Thérèse Morin-Blais, 64. And she just shot him dead in this room. And then she shot herself dead. So yet another murder-suicide. It was a Sunday evening. Now, she did it. She had a reason to do it because the hospital staff was going to transfer Olerhead for his Alzheimer's situation from the Lakeshore to a downtown hospital called the Jacques Viget, and that's a French institution, and she really didn't want him in a French place, so she shot him and then herself dead. Very sad story. And speaking of sad, this is possibly one of the saddest of the whole bunch. There was just sit tight when I'm telling you this story, it's crazy. There were three young children, 14, 9, and 3. They were living on Pierre de Coubertin Avenue, which is, of course, near the Olympic Stadium. Mary Luz, 14, Luisa Antonio, 9, and Jose Alonso Ortiz Lopez, 3, were strangled to death at their home. And the father was the culprit. So his name was Luis Humberto Ortiz Echaiz, 41. I believe he was a former Peruvian police officer, and he came to Canada 2 years earlier with his wife. I believe they'd been in France for some time before that, too. Now, the thing is, his wife was a very impressive character. Her name was Bertha Lopez Ortiz. She had come to Canada to do postdoctoral studies at UQAM and was hired by a research institute in Varennes, Quebec. So things were going good for her, but out of the blue, she was diagnosed with incurable colon cancer and just had days to live. Can you believe it? So everything was going good for the family. They came to Canada from Peru, but boom, she got a cancer diagnosis and was dying. So she went into a coma at this time, and that's when the father killed the kids. So very sad. And he was deemed insane to stand trial, and he had some sort of delusion that his wife had AIDS and that the kids had AIDS too. So I don't have a photo of any of these people, but it's we should let them be enshrined in our memory. I suppose this guy is still around, and he's still doing whatever he's doing, but that's a super sad story. Oh, I should mention, of course, that the mother had no knowledge that her children were murdered, so she happened to die of her disease after being in a coma just about the same time as he committed maybe a day or two after he committed the murder. So family's going good. They had 5 people, and suddenly they're down to 1 person. Boy, that's really devastating. So here's another story from June 16. A young man, Christopher Belair, age 19. He was just doing his schooling. He was from Greenfield Park on the South Shore. He was trying to finish his high school at, Mind on, it's a school called Mind on University just above Sherbrooke, and it's across from McGill. So it used to be the University of Montreal. So he come into town to do his classes. Now, I know somebody who knew Christopher Belair, and he said that he was an interesting character. He launched a petition at his high school, which is called Centennial Regional High School in Greenfield Park, and he wanted dyed hair and piercings to be permitted, but they didn't allow him. So it's unclear what the reason was that he had a dispute, but police managed to round up two other young men, Kenneth Yip and Sammy Peretz. I don't know what they were found guilty, or if they were what their sentence was. I didn't find that in any reports. So um, I did find the name Kenneth Lee Yip, and I'm believing it's the same character. He was involved in many other crimes thereafter. In 2009, some sort of cocaine deal. Very sad that this young man, Christopher Belair, had to die, and I guess we try to remember him with this video. So on June 29, there's a pair of separate murders downtown, senseless murders downtown on the same night that were unrelated. And Lance Snape, age 21, he was stabbed to death in front of Club 281. If you remember Montreal's Club 281, which is a male strip club for women, St. Catherine, and near the corner of Sanguinet. It's since closed. It was a real moneymaker, a big deal in Montreal for many decades. So a guy named Andrew Colley, 25, he was with his pal Jason Maskell. Andrew Colley was a pretty bad character who was involved in street gangs for at least 6 years prior to that. He stabbed and he killed Lance Snape in front of this bar, and he was, even when the guy was on the ground, he was like kicking him and stuff. So it was not a very cool thing for Andrew Colley to be doing, and he was declared a dangerous offender in 2002. So as far as I know, he might still be behind bars, because this is not the sort of thing that we want people to be doing. So I couldn't find a victim of. I couldn't find a photo of the victim, Lance Snape, but there was a few published memorials signed by his family, his mother Diana, Jessica, Jeremy, John, Justice. So it's a big family, and it's unfortunate to see someone die on that. And that very same evening, another senseless crime occurred, also downtown. There's a bar on Mountain called the Heaven Club. I don't know where that was. A guy named Dwayne McKenzie, 21, who was a Torontonian visiting Montreal for the Cara Fiesta Caribbean parade and carnival and parties. He was shot to death with 4 bullets on the sidewalk. What happened is a bunch of scumbags, bunch of thieves. Paul Huggins Denis, of 19 years old, of LaSalle, was one of them. They wanted his gold chain around his neck. So it was about 3:30 a.m. And what happened is Mackenzie said, "I don't really want to give you my gold chain, because," and so basically, it was a chain that the young man had received from his mother in Toronto, and it wasn't really something he wanted to surrender. The accused, Denis, he lied, or he claimed that he did not commit the crime. He said, "Oh, some other guy named Buster shot him. It wasn't me." But of course, they found the stolen crucifix in the pocket of Paul Huggins Denis, and the judge was very unflattering towards him, called him a parasite and a young liar, which is quite a harsh criticism. So that story was also reported on, because the victim's parents, Dwayne McKenzie's parents, came to Montreal to the trial, which was held in French, and there were no translators available for them to follow the action, and eventually somebody paid for a translator. So they saw this all unfurl before them, a very sad thing, of course. On 18 July, Mario Patitucci, 37, and Tien Hu Tran, 30, were shot dead at a bar on St. Lawrence near Bellechasse. Do you know where that is? If you go up St. Lawrence, you got this little underpass for a train, and just before Little Italy. So the bar would have been somewhere around there. I don't know the exact address, probably on the west side. So somebody walked into the bar at about 12:20 a.m., didn't say a word, walked to the video poker machine where Mario Patitucci was playing, and shot him dead. So the other character, Tien Hu Tran, was probably just innocent and had nothing to do with anything, and he was just caught in the crossfire. And I don't know if he was playing the VLTs as well. Police made no arrests, but once again, they noted that Patitucci was associated with Michael Fidanoglu. And Michael Fidanoglu, Crazy Mike, was causing a lot of problems at the time. So he might have been the shooter, but it's unknown. It was unsolved. On 28th July 1998, Maxime Ayotte McPhee, a baby just 8 weeks old, was living with her mother on Galt Street in Verdun. She was beaten to death, and her father, Patrick Ayotte, just 21 years old, pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 8 years for manslaughter. The mother, 19, left the baby with her boyfriend Patrick while she drove her other child, 2 years old, to her parents' home. So that's just, I don't think there's any explaining that or understanding that. It's just makes no sense. Now, here's a really sad one. It was a story similar to the Peruvian guy who killed his kids. This fellow, what was his name? Sung Nuk Kok, 34. He was from South Korea, and he came to Montreal with his family, his wife, and their 2 sons. So they were living on Bishop Street, and he was working in a restaurant. And what happened is I guess he lost his job. It's not really clear what his situation was because he didn't speak much English or French. I think he was believed to be kind of a drinker. So he was the janitor or building superintendent on Bishop Street knocked on his door and said, "Look, do you have your rent money?" And for the first time ever, this fellow, Sung Nukok, was actually quite belligerent because he was always very sweet and nice to everybody. But he had stopped working about 3 months prior, so obviously he had no connection, he had no family here, he had no friends here, and it was a difficult situation. But he ended up stabbing his wife and two sons to death. And then he rushed over to a vacant building in Old Montreal on Saint Sacrament Street, and he hanged himself there. So it's a very sad, tragic story. Once again, I have no photos, but that's a picture of the cops taking his hanged body out of the Old Montreal building. So on 31 July, we have another sort of spurned lover murder. There's a guy named Felix Kouadio from Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, who was angry because his wife was moving out of their place on De Carry Boulevard. Her name was Marguerite Boca, 31. She was the victim. Felix Kouadio stabbed her to death, and a fellow who was helping her move. That fellow survived. So after committing this crime, Kouadio launched himself onto the tracks at the metro station at the Snowdon Metro, but he survived. They had a 7-year-old daughter at the time, so unfortunately she lost both her parents. Or I should say, she lost her mother. I guess the father survived. And I don't know what sentence he had for the crime. Next one is a pretty crazy story. Occurred on 8 August. Well, it actually occurred a few days earlier, but it was classified as 8 August. France Beauregard, 34, sex worker from the East End. She was found chopped up in a bunch of garbage bags in 2010 Nicolet Street. So her body had been there for about a dozen days. Now, this relatively respectable guy, Louis Lafont, 35, he was working as some sort of computer thing at UQAM, and he told his roommate, "I killed somebody." It was a kid named Antoine Lemieux. They were both drinking beer on the roof, and he said out of the blue, this guy, Louis Lafont, says, "By the way, I just killed somebody." He claimed that he killed a man who was coming after him. It was self-defense. But then he showed him the body in the closet. He noticed, Lemieux noticed that Lafont had been burning a lot of incense, obviously to cover up the smell of the dead bodies in his closet, the dead body pieces. And so Lemieux had to act fast. What would you do if you had a roommate who said, "Hey, look at this dead body I got in my closet of a guy I killed"? Of course, it wasn't a guy he killed. It was a blameless sex worker, a street prostitute. And so Lemieux, upon hearing this, he goes, "Oh, you probably should take those body pieces and bury them out in the countryside." So he kind of gave him the sense that he wasn't going to rat him out. But of course, like any sane person, Lemieux immediately went to the police and told them that my roommate, Louis Lafont, has got a dead body in his closet, and the cops were pretty skeptical. But by the time the cops came to the home at 2010 Nicolet, Lafont had fled. I believe he went to BC for a while. Then he was found in Ottawa at a homeless shelter. He got 9 years in prison for the. I suppose he probably should have gotten longer, but who knows how these things work. And the sad thing is that the victim, France Beauregard, I've been asked to have a photo of her. I don't have it. She had left the home that day telling her 14-year-old son that she was going to go work the streets so she could buy him some rollerblades. She was badly addicted to heroin. Here's another woman. I'd like to see her photo. I think people have heard this name, Tina Diaz. She was killed on 22 August in 1998. It's a sad story. She was living with a boyfriend named Sean Small, who was 14 years older than her, and I guess they were on Beaconsfield Avenue in NDG, probably near St. James Street, and they had been out to a bar called Stripes. And they were arguing right in the street, quite prominently, like hitting each other right in the street. And police even saw them and said, "What the hell's going on?" And they intervened, but they let them go home. And later on, Small told his friend there's something wrong with Diaz, and he brought her to the hospital. And there was a small knife wound in her chest. Unfortunately, it was right in her heart, and she died in hospital soon after. Young Tina Diaz, just 19 years old. So sad. Anyway, Small, he turned himself into police a couple of days later, and he denied that he killed her. I don't know what his exact excuse was, but he got charged with murder, and he was sentenced to life in. So another weird thing about this Sean Small story is this. He was, when I said he was sentenced to life, he had to serve at least 10 years before being eligible for parole. So I suppose he's out now. But the thing is, when he was age 19, he was there when his brother Wendell was killed outside the College Metro station. And that was a totally crazy story. It was a guy named Philip Bird who was in a car, and he had been arguing with people, and he just drove into a crowd. So Philip Bird killed Wendell Small and another young woman, 18, named Magali Joachim, by driving into them. So it's just a sad story. So you had this guy Wendell getting killed, and then his younger brother Sean, who watched it happen, then went and killed a young woman by stabbing her in the heart with a small knife. So that was just a bad luck and bad karma situation. On 27 August 1998, there's a fight between welfare recipients on Fulham Street in the East End. A guy named Robert Horth, age 55, hit a neighbor named Norman, who looked like Jesus Christ. And this other fellow, Norman, whose name was not published, he was not charged with the killing, but he probably did it. He had been pestering Robert Horth to allow him to move in with him, and had been seen in the apartment before. And Robert Horth was found dead in a burning bed, but it was believed that he was already dead by the time the fire was set. On 3 September 1998, a fellow named Biagio Luigi, 72 years old, he was beaten to death. He was living in a low-rent apartment at 2365 Désirable near Sherbrooke Street East, and he had a pair of sons. And one of them found him dead in the apartment on a Thursday afternoon. He'd been savagely beaten and kicked. Now, the thing was, he had a dispute with his neighbor, Luc Guillemette, age 33, lived across the hall. Apparently, Biagio Luigi, the 72-year-old, had lent him a TV, and instead Guillemette just pawned it off. So that led to a conflict, understandably. And Guillemette was he was found guilty of beating him dead. So I don't know what sentence was in this case. I guess this guy Luc Guillemette would probably be what if he'd be in his late 50s now. So next we got 11 September 1998. There was a family affair with a mental illness. Jayashree Patel, 42. She was a mother of 3 teenage boys. She was stabbed to death at her sister's home in Côte St. Luc. You know the Côte St. Luc housing cooperative? That what would that be on Côte St. Luc? Avenue Boulevard Street. Anyway, so her brother, she was visiting her sister, and then there was her brother happened to be there, Kiran Patel, and he what did he do? He stabbed her to death. He he was mentally unstable. They had all come to India about 15 years earlier, and the reason that this guy Kiran Patel killed his sister, I'm not exactly sure of the details, but it's obviously a mental illness thing. 29 September 1998, Agnes McCormick Mackenzie, 95. Well, she was killed at the Lakeview Memorial Garden Cemetery in Point Claire. Now, what happened is her son, Ronald Mackenzie, 58, who lived in Westport, Connecticut, Westport, Ontario, which is north of Kingston, he just somehow rigged his car to poison them both, himself and his mother, and he survived. But what happened is that he was charged with murder, but then it was lowered to attempted murder because an autopsy determined that his mother, who was 95, did not actually die from the carbon monoxide poisoning. So I don't really know what happened to Ronald Mackenzie, but he'd be in his mid-70s by now. Okay, so on 16 October, a guy named Robert Choquette Jr., he was just a little kid, 18 years old, celebrating his 18th birthday in a bar, and some lunatic named Guy-Adrien Langlois, 20, saw him on the street waiting for a bus at Frontenac in Sherbrooke. And he walked over and said, "What are you staring at me for?" And so, Choquette didn't know what to say. He said, "I'm not staring at you." And what happened is this guy, Langlois, he pulled out a screwdriver and just stabbed him in the head. And the kid died, Robert Choquette, on his 18th birthday. So what happened is Choquette's parents were quite irritated because they were aware that the killer, Langlois, had he probably shouldn't have been out on the streets. He had attacked a cop in a similar violent screwdriver attack in the past, and he had been suicidal, and 3 of his family members actually killed themselves, this Langlois guy. So a little footnote to the story is that 2 fellow inmates of the RDP prison beat him savagely while inside, and I guess they had to. Do you know who Adonis Stevenson is? I hope you do. He's a famous boxer who became a champion, and then he was seriously injured in a fight, and I believe that he barely was hanging on. I don't know what his current situation is, but Adonis Stevenson was a pretty rough guy. You don't want to get beaten up by him, but Langlois was badly beaten up. Langlois would have been eligible for parole in 2010. I do not know where he is or what he's doing, but try to stay away from him if you see him. Okay, so we're talking 20 October. This is sort of a famous case. Milia Abrar, 22, she's a Dawson College student. She was stabbed to death in a public bathroom in Angrenon Park. Now, she was stabbed 20 times and splattered with acid. Now, she'd come to Montreal from Bangladesh in 1990 and was planning to attend Concordia University, and she, had been involved in dance shows and other things. And there was no real suspects, except they rounded one guy up who was a sort of like he had been trying to court her, and they questioned him, and he failed a polygraph test, and nothing came of it. Nothing came. He was never charged. He was just moved to Toronto. He was another South Asian guy. So it's assumed that this guy moved to Toronto. And that's it. Her brother, Milki Farouk, he's vigilant in his memorials for the lovely young victim here, Milia Abrar. And it's unfortunate that she died, obviously, and it's even more unfortunate that her killer was never apprehended or charged. There was a double murder on November 10, 1998. Two rock machine guys were up in Montreal North. Usually we associate the rock machine with like Verdun and that part of town, and a bit in the East End. But I guess these guys were up in Montreal North and just sitting in a car. Stéphane Morgan, 30, and Daniel Boulet, 30. They were both born on the actual same date, the same day, and they died on the same day. Morgan was a rock machine member for at least 3 years. Boulet was an associate. and I guess somebody just snuck up on them and shot them dead with a machine gun in their Chevy Celebrity. So Morgan was pretty good pals with Johnny Plesio, who was a Rock Machine founder, and there's a whole bunch of other Rock Machine people killed in 1988, but they were not on the island of Montreal, so they're not on this list. So the 38th murder of 1998 in Montreal was Marie-Jeanne Mathieu. She died of brain injuries, killed by her foster mother, Lynn Lafont. Just, I don't know any more about that, but it's just obviously very sad. On 26 November 1998, Armando Pereira, 36. He was a bartender. He hadn't been working too long. The Oiseau de Nuit bar on Park Avenue near Mount Royal. I think it was a basement place. I probably passed by it. He had only been working for a few weeks now. Who could have done this? I was thinking, oh, is this Mad Mike, Crazy Mike Fidenuglio again? But it wasn't. It wasn't a shooting, so it was a stabbing. So maybe it wasn't him. I don't have a photo of Armando Pereira, and that murder remains unsolved. The 40th murder of 1998 was a sad tale of a little baby named Marie-Pierre Joly-Four, who was killed by her father at a Thursday evening at their home on 14th Avenue in Saint Michel. The father, named Guy Joly, 29, he was a compulsive gambler, and he also stabbed the mother of the child, I guess his wife, Valérie Girard, 24, who had dumped him recently over his gambling addiction. He stabbed her pretty good, over 20 times, and possibly a lot more, but she managed to survive and get help from a neighbor. So I salute this woman, and she was not aware that her child was killed, and she obviously was super distraught about it. So they had separated several days earlier. And this guy, Joly, just like the other fellow I mentioned, he actually had a profession. He had a real job, and he was working at the 911 services. So it was quite a shock to everybody that he would have pulled this incredibly awful stunt. And in 2000, he was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole for 18 years. So this is like the longest sentence that we've seen. Presumably he's out of prison now because, well, maybe he isn't. Now, the last murder of 1998, I don't have a photo of the victim, but I have a photo of some of his family members in shock at the murder. This was a biker war killing, a guy named Lawrence Bellas, who was a high-ranking Hells Angels guy, basically controlled the drug trade in the gay village. He was sitting down at a restaurant at 1420 Cartier Street. That's right across from the Papineau Metro, and it was called Maison de Bière Importée, so the imported beer house. He was just sitting there. There was a lot of people in the bar, in the restaurant at the time. He was dining alone, and somebody came in and shot him dead. And they managed to hit a couple of other people in the restaurant, innocent bystanders. And the murder remains unsolved, of course. But the weird thing was that about a week after, a couple of somebody went and burnt the whole place, the whole restaurant down. I don't know what sort of message that was. So that's the entire list of murders, homicides, killings from the year 1998 on the island of Montreal. I'm going to be putting this up on my site, Coolopolis, right now.